Welcome to this episode of Orthodontics in Interview. It's my absolute pleasure to have Dr. James Andrew joining us. Welcome, James, to Orthodontics in Interview.
Thanks, Farooq. Thanks for having me. I feel very humble to be invited, but yeah, I'll try and do my best, and yeah, we'll see how it goes.
It's going to be great, James. So I've been following James for a long time on Instagram, and I'm going to give his introduction in just a second. But I want to talk about how I thought of James. So when I qualified, went onto Instagram, started kind of putting in hashtags ortho, and then James Andrews came up. And I thought James was an institution because his posts had evidence-based to them. They had biomechanics. I thought this must be some organization. And then I saw a random picture of his family. I was like, so this is actually a human being at the end of it. It's one person. And I've been following him ever since. So James is, in my mind, he is an institution when it comes to education in orthodontics. He's based in private practice in Perth in Australia. He did his dental school in the University of Dundee in the UK. He did his residency in British Columbia in Canada. He's got 22,000 followers on Instagram. Majority of his posts, the 600 plus now, are based on orthodontics. He talks about biomechanics, TADS, ortho-restorative interface, MDT with perio interface, loop closure. He's got a research interest in digital orthodontics. He's published a chapter, which will be coming forwards, in the 3D diagnosis and treatment planning in orthodontics, which the lead author is John Mark Retrouvier, who's leading on digital orthodontics. And he's also a under-11s cricket coach as well, which is a key thing, I think, considering the cricket tournament going on at the moment. So welcome, James, to Orthodontics Interview.
Thank you. Thank you for that very gracious introduction. But yeah, I certainly don't see myself as an institution, but yeah, we'll see.
Well, that's the world of social media. They make what it will from it. So I think the first question for me, James, is really how did that process happen? How did you get into publishing posts on Instagram? How did that begin?
Well, Instagram for me started actually as a general dentist, more as like an advertising venture, to be honest. And then I've always had a love for photography, and I think photography changed the way I practice as a general dentist, and then moving into ortho. I think Dr. Kennedy, or my professor David Kennedy, would always talk about good infrastructure. Infrastructure being records and taking excellent records. And I think that's something that luckily I had a good background in that before I got into ortho, but taking good photographs, and then that merged into Instagram, taking good records, taking good photographs, and then starting to post cases, and it's something that I really enjoy doing. And I like to link in then evidence, relating to the case, whether that be a biomechanical paper, whether that be a growth paper, whether that be, any particular sort of topic or program module that I was doing at that particular time, and then link it to the cases that I was doing. And it just morphed from there really into this thing that I get like hundreds of comments and messages every day now. So it's almost like there's too much. I can't unfortunately get back to everybody, but it's yeah, I really enjoy it, and I think I try and make it very evidence based, and I think hopefully people get some good stuff out of it. And I also like to post stuff that I don't do well, and I think that's really important, that we're honest with our cases and honest with our treatments. And I think social media can be a bit of a double-edged sword. There's a lot of snakes and ladders and myths and sort of grayness, but then there's that to me, I call myself a bit of a juxtaposition. I like to be honest and try and be honest, and I think people appreciate that. Well, it seems to anyway.
And I think very much that honesty in your story comes out. And I think one of your recent posts was an aligner case that you did, or you're currently doing, and you've used TADS, and you've still not quite gotten there in this Biomax protrusive case. And I think it's so bold to post that, because a lot of social media tends to be about, look at a great case, look how great I am. But I think in your posts, they have a very different narrative where there is something shown, there is the evidence or justification given for it. And when it hasn't worked as well, you're critical in that appraisal.
Yeah.
And I think I feel that's part of why you are so popular, is because there is definitely a theme there of honesty in good and in bad.
Yeah.
And I think that's really powerful in our profession.
No, 100%. And I think we really have to look at our cases and really examine them with fine detail to see what we've achieved. Because if we don't see our mistakes, we're just destined to make a repetition of mistakes through our career. So again, I'll probably go into it later, but one of my mentors, David Kennedy, is just, there's so many people who don't look at the final results because there's a reason why, right? They don't, and then they'll never get better. So, it's we're all clinicians. We all want to get better, and the only way to do that is realize what mistakes you're making or what you've done wrong. You don't pat yourself in the back when you do good things.
Yeah, yeah. And picking up on your post, so there is also a theme in your post about biomechanics, and that's very much
Yeah.
the kind of almost a subspecialty I feel in orthodontics from a theoretical and clinical perspective. Why is it that you seem to centric yourself on the biomechanics in orthodontics?
Well, I really like to, I really like to focus, I think, on precise treatment objectives. So, for example, where do I want that final tooth position, and how precise can I be, in getting that position? What force system do I need to achieve that? What design of appliance, for example, what appliance is appropriate for that tooth movement that I want? And really, what will the side effects be? Because to every force, there's a reactionary force, and I want to understand the side effects and how can I minimize that. And I think that's really how the biomechanics thing. I always love maths and mechanics, and I like engineering, and I think the mechanical side is really interesting, and I think it's something that maybe I don't want to say that a lot of people ignore, but it's something I don't like cookie cutter orthodontics where it's right, here's a playbook, every patient's the same. But how can that
Yeah,
be? Every patient is absolutely different, and every malocclusion is different. And I think we have to be more precise. Well, I'm not saying we have to, but I think it makes sense that we're more precise in our thinking and our treatment objectives, and then the plan to get us there. Because it's a massive difference by say treating a hyperdivergent patient than a hypodivergent patient.
hmm hmm
And then the added beauty is then there's a lot of these cases that we're dealing with growth, and that's a huge unknown for us. So when we look at again Sinclair papers and normal growth studies, and I'm trying to mimic. Right. Well, if I think this patient is going to grow like this, how can I make sure that I don't increase that mandibular plane angle? What are my mechanics going to be? So, you know, I have to say I'm probably a bit anal about treatment planning, and I spend an awful long time doing it. But that's just the way I am, and that's what I expect. I'd want to be treated that way, and that's why I want to treat my patients, I think.
That's amazing. That is amazing. James, I want to ask a bit about your journey because you've traversed three continents. So you went from the UK through to Canada to Australia. So what took you to these very different locations?
Well, I actually grew up in Belfast, in Northern Ireland, and then my dad was actually a consultant physician in medicine, and he traveled a lot. He did research in P. mendius, diabetes was his specialty, so he lived in Arizona for a while. He traveled to Saudi Arabia. He did a lot of work all around the world, and I think that's where maybe my passion for traveling came in. I did obviously my undergrad in Dundee and did a VT in Edinburgh, um, and worked with actually Professor Jim McDonald. I don't know if you know Professor Jim McDonald in Kirkcaldy
Yeah, yeah.
Hospital, and I was able to meet Bill
Okay.
Clark. And I actually always loved ortho, but I was actually quite late to actually doing the specialty myself. But I think I always had a love for ortho, and I always wanted to do it. And then I finished VT, and I really was disillusioned at that stage. I hated NHS dentistry. It just wasn't for me. And then actually I went to Australia at that stage after VT, and I traveled and worked and traveled and surfed. And then I returned to Edinburgh after that to practice. And then met my wife, Emma, who's Australian, believe it or not, traveling. Well, my
Wow.
future wife, she was my wife then, but we then moved back to Australia, and I set up practice in Australia, and then decided to do my residency in Canada because I always wanted to study in North America. I just always had this. I want to go and study in North America. So I was really fortunate. I actually had a couple of choices. I could have gone to University of Pacific or Harvard, or Indiana or Vancouver, and I chose
Mhm.
Vancouver. So yeah, I'm very fortunate that I did because I really enjoyed the program and met some brilliant people. So really, 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 really good teaching.
Very good, very good. So then I need to ask you the question, having gone to these different planes, is that what is better, the UK or Australia?
Look, definitely
Bear in
some,
mind that
some
bear in mind that the UK is a bigger audience to this podcast, just saying.
yeah, I, I miss, there's two things I miss about the UK, and that's the people and the sense of humor, right? I don't really miss the weather, I have to admit, but there's this, the cultures are, people are quite different, and a lot of people don't get my sort of sarcasm. You probably see it in some of my posts, but a lot
Yeah,
of my posts have a little touch of sarcasm in it, and that's very British, right? We never like to
yeah,
overplay ourselves, or we don't have, and I think that's something that I miss, and I miss that dryness and humor, which sometimes
yeah.
I have to explain myself, a little bit.
I think that the most challenging thing is when you're talking to somebody and you have to explain your joke. And for me, it's usually not a very good joke anyway. And it's like, oh God,
Yeah,
it's like
I'm
nails on a
not really
blackboard.
being
It's not
serious. I'm
nice.
being, and sarcasm is something that
Yeah,
certainly it's ingrained in Irish and Scottish people and English people, of course.
yes,
But yeah,
yes.
so I think that's it. But yeah, I love Australia. I love the climate. My kids were born here. They're full
Uh-huh.
true blue Aussies. They don't support England or Ireland and all that sort of stuff.
Hmm,
Um,
hmm.
but yeah, no, I'm probably I'd say yeah, I miss a lot of things about the UK, and I miss Tato
Okay.
crisps. Yeah, that's that's the thing about Ireland.
I
But
mean,
yeah,
that's why England. Yeah, that's why England is the best. So great, we've answered that question. So I want to ask now that you're in Australia, I'm really interested to know the international kind of manifestations of orthodontics and also what the challenges are. So what being there on the ground, what are the challenges for Australian orthodontics at the moment?
well, look, this is a pretty hard question to answer, and I I would like to say direct to consumer is certainly something that's growing quite quickly here. Is that a problem? I have probably an interesting opinion on direct to consumer. I've got a, I don't really like company based orthodontics. So there's huge companies who have massive marketing, and the most famous one obviously being Invisalign, um,
Hmm.
which which a lot of patients come to see you now because they want Invisalign, because they've been, the brands out there, they've been sold the story. And while aligners are great at some things, there's certainly a lot of things that they're not terribly good at. And I and then unfortunately I think practitioners maybe jump on that gravy train a little bit. And are they delivering the best care? So I think I don't know if it's just Australia, but I think that's sort of fairly wide based. That are we delivering the best care to our patients just because the patients want a particular thing? I think you don't want to make a sale if it goes against your better judgment and how to achieve your best treatment outcome. So for example, I get a lot of people come in and ask for Invisalign, then they walk out with braces on their teeth, right? Or I'll
Hmm.
do upper aligners and lower braces because I want to intrude their lower incisors. Or you know,
Yeah.
I'll do some sort of hybrid case, or I'll start with braces, do the heavy lifting, and then we'll finish with aligners. So I think
Hmm.
that's the way I'm seeing it, and I think certainly short term purely cosmetic and unstable treatments are very common now, and I unfortunately I'm seeing a lot of these cases because they relapse faster than they
Yeah.
claim to be able to finish them. So that's a big problem for us, and I think that's in general dentistry, and I think that's going to be something that it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out, because already see it. I see it every week, unfortunately. So
I think that's an international challenge. That you got
yeah,
adults who are having their third or fourth course of orthodontics because they've done a number of short-term orthodontics
yeah,
through different means and clinicians and so forth, and yeah, they've kind of gone full circle and come back to the initial. Um, so James, I wanted to also ask with social media, is that where do you think it should fit into to orthodontic education in comparison to the conventional streams of education, the conferences, the papers? Where do you see it fitting in?
yeah. I think we've got to be. I think it's first of all, it's got this huge potential because of the global audience that you can get, the accessibility to good information, but it's got a double edged sword. So there's a lot of maybe fringe-based orthodontics, maybe non-evidence-based orthodontics that people maybe who don't have a good foundational knowledge or don't do their own reading or research might believe. So I think it's got this enormous potential. Like your page, like Patrick Fleming's page is awesome. Some of the clinical orthodontic pages are brilliant. Giorgio Forelli does biomechanics like nobody else. I love that sort of stuff. But then there's other sort of stuff, which is you can see it has a huge number of followers, but really isn't evidence based. So I think it's got the potential to be really good, but at the same time, it can lack that peer review that certainly systematic reviews and really good sort of clinical randomized control trials have and things like that. So I think we've got to, as I try and do, we've got to blend it with evidence. And I think if you do that and it's on that sort of forum and that sort of platform, I think it can be really powerful and you can certainly get your message out to a huge audience. And they don't have to pay a fortune for it either, which is nice.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things I've picked up from yourself is that there is that theoretical thing you'll learn from the paper. You'll be able to recite it, the date, the title, the author, and blah, blah, blah. But actually, when you see it in a photo of the teeth moving, that's when it makes sense. And some people like yourself have that third eye where you can do that in your mind. But I think it's great for the rest of us who don't have that perhaps cognitive power, specifically myself, who then can see it and go, oh yeah, that's what it means. And then that's cemented that research, but actually in clinical practice, because ultimately that's what it's about. It's about the patient. So sticking to the theme of orthodontics and clinical skills, I want to know, who do you admire the most in orthodontics?
Oh, look, I think certainly from my program, I'll start with them. There's David Kennedy. He's a dual specialist pediatrics and orthodontics. He was trained in University of Washington with Peter Sinclair and June Deff and Will Little, all these great names, Kokich. And like a lot of our sort of program was based around their research and their research at the University of Washington. And then, Ed Yen was very based in biology. And then we had, like there's too many, Bing Shan Zhu, she was my principal in my research. Fantastic orthodontist, like can bend meow or multi-edge arch wire or multi-loop arch wires in like 5 minutes chairside. Wow. Right. And then we had Professor Jae Sung, who came from Korea, who was the first guy who started the Dentos TAD system. So he came for a year as a visiting professor, and I learned so much of. I just literally lucked out on all this guy. Then we had Ben Pliska, who's one of the leaders in sleep apnea research, which is very topical at the minute, sleep. So he's very pragmatic and very well versed in sleep. And then I love reading Lyle Johnson's work. Jay Bowman, Sheldon Peck, Melson, Zackerson, Rosa, Fleming, O'Brien, like all this research, which brilliant minds and brilliant studies. And I think the biggest thing about our program, was how we learned to deconstruct research and actually look for every little bit of bias and where does this paper fall down. And I think that's from that. Every paper's got a little bit of gold in it, but if you can identify the bias and look at the sample and actually really read the paper, then only then you'll get actually the truth out of it. And whether that be one little bit of truth or a lot of truth, and I think that's the beauty about research. It's not, you just don't read the abstract and conclusion, because those can ultimately be actually total opposite to what the paper is showing.
Absolutely. I remember one of the things with Kevin O'Brien, he would always say he'll just look at the tables. So not the actual written results, he'll just go to tables and work it out himself. And I think that's such a powerful idea that you've put forwards, that we should be appraising whilst reading. And I suppose the same is in social media, as you've already said, is that appraisal process should take place as to what information we're receiving as an input in our orthodontic practice. The final question I want to conclude with, James, is what one piece of advice would you give to all orthodontists out there?
Like, I think certainly, take excellent records. Look at your records when you finish, and really try and judge your treatment effect, and just be honest. I think there's something like, if you stuff like, I remember David Kenny just saying, like, if you've done something wrong, just tell the patient, be honest, and like, it's just being a human, being a good human, looking at, how can I get better. Every case, you're never going to be perfect, so try and find out what you did wrong, and then fix it and make it better, and every day you'll get a little bit better. And I think that's, to me, just that's very simple logic to follow. But you got to look. If you don't look, you'll never see.
Mm,
And I think that's pretty important.
excellent. James, thank you so much for joining me on this podcast again. And I look forward to seeing you next post. Thank you so much, my friend.
Yeah, no, you're welcome, and thanks so much for having me. It was a real good experience, and hopefully we'll meet in person soon.
Fingers crossed, my man.
Yeah.
I'll bring the crisps.
Okay, awesome.